All right, so just a little bit more on kind of like my transition. Again, my whole life I was a communist, pretty much anti-white. Uh, then I became in 2024 or no 2014 a kind of a right winger nationalist, pro-white. Then I became a communist again, and then 2016 I became a right winger again. And I'll kind of describe a little bit more about what my grandpa's teachings that kind of moved me more to the right wing, and I'll kind of describe how, and then in 2020 I became a left winger again, and how I kind of got confused by what my grandpa was teaching, and he didn't teach me well. He didn't teach me what the flow really was, and I just got confused. So I think that one thing that like when my grandpa talked about transcending dualistic software, he never really explained it, and he started to explain it to me a little bit in 2019. But when he would explain it, let's talk about dualistic software, I would think that he's talking about like something like hippie, like flow, like the hippie flow, like, oh yeah, non-dualistic. Oh, so let's like let go of all borders and let's all, race mix and see myself as Jewish and wanting the white people to mix. Like that's what I wanted. So he was kind of like appealing to my default and to my ego. And I thought, oh, well, that's non-dualistic software. Let's all mix. But that was part of my ego. That wasn't non-dualistic. Now I know that non-dualistic is when you don't recognize self and other, like when you realize everything is one and there is no thing, or that this world is an illusion. But that's kind of what Dr. Horror taught, but my grandpa didn't really teach that. My grandpa's like, everything is energy. But it's kind of different, and I'll get to that a little bit. But so at first, like when he's talking about non-dualistic, I'm thinking that he's talking about like a hippie left-wing communist type of thing. But then later, around 2019, he starts teaching me a little bit like his ideas of different levels of software. So he's like, well, first there's the impersonal type of levels of software, and that includes like predator prey and ally enemy. And ally enemy would be like, if you do it for me, then you're my ally. If not, you're my enemy, and I'll hurt you. And it's impersonal because it's action oriented and you'll hurt the person. But then he said there's other levels like attitudinal, interpersonal levels of dualistic software, which would be like superior, inferior software, where it's like it's just an attitude, like I'm superior, and it's still focusing on the idea that there's a separate self. And then also like insider, outsider could be action oriented, impersonal, or attitudinal, interpersonal, in that it could be action oriented or not, or just attitudinal. And like action oriented would be like, I'm an insider, so I'm gonna kick everybody out of the group. That'd be action oriented, impersonal software. But then there's just also attitudinal insider, outsider software. Like I'm an insider and it doesn't require action. So my grandpa's teaching me these different levels, right? And I think that he described that he kind of came up with these on his own. But then he would talk about like, there's cooperation, which is a higher level of software. He would say like, later he would teach me like superior, inferior, like, he said the ego is magnificent in its accomplishments, but it's limited in its reach. So he said, somebody could try to be superior and he could achieve great things, but ultimately it's a flow that, transcending the self that is the highest and that gets you to the highest levels. But ironically, you're not trying to be superior. You're just going for excellence and going all out and you're losing yourself, right? You're like Forrest Gump and you run and then you lose yourself and then you're in the flow. But he would talk about cooperation as a higher level than superior, inferior, because he said that cooperation was like, you believe that there's separate people, but you're at least working together, and it's a movement toward oneness. Now, like I said, when I was anti-white communist, I looked at cooperation as kind of like a white person type of thing, and a negative thing, because I wanted everything good to be bad and bad to be good, and I wanted it to be like, yeah, people, like the white people, they just want loyalty and they're into like loyalty and faithfulness and stuff like that, but that's because they believe in the separate self. But, in the flow, you lose the sense of self, and non-conformity is better than conformity, because when you don't conform, you're closer to the flow. And like, and when you're in conformity, you have social approbation. So it's harder to get into the flow because you become content and relaxed and you get social approval. But if you're in non-conformity, you can at least get in trouble, and that can get you closer to the flow. So I tried to mix everything up, and I try to make the black good and the white bad, right? But my grandpa would talk about cooperation as a higher level of software, and because it's moving toward oneness, but you still believe that there's separate selves. But then he would talk about there's mutual participation, which is higher than cooperation. And he would say that mutual participation is focusing on something larger than yourself. So you're starting to lose yourself and you're not cooperating with others. You're not focusing on others, but you're focusing on something larger than yourself. So like an example my grandpa would give is like dancing. He would say, if you're dancing, focusing on your dance partner, then you're not in the flow. It's still interpersonal and you're still a self in another. But if you're in mutual participation, you're focusing on the music, then you're closer to the flow and you can lose yourself. But then he would say there's mutual participation in national projects. So my grandpa would say, so you move out of just cooperation with people in your group and then you move toward nationalism, which is actually a step beyond, where it's like cooperation with your nation, nationalism, and more mutual participation in national projects. So like things for your nation. But then he said, ultimately, the highest level is mutual participation in global projects. Now, when I was left as communist, I liked his ideas like that because I was like, yeah, globalism, that's good. Let's dissolve all national boundaries, but, and let's mix the white people and destroy the white people. That's because I was anti-white. But then when my grandpa started teaching me when I started studying more, and I'm like, well, actually, the flow isn't necessarily that. Now I know that it's not necessarily race mixing and dissolving borders, because the flow can also be, like there's heart cells and then there's brain cells, and they don't necessarily have to mix. And a part of the flow could be not mixing, and just making people excel where they're at. You don't have to try to mix people. That could be trying to force oneness, right? And that wouldn't be the flow. But regardless, when I was anti-white communist, I was anti-white and I wanted race mixing, but to destroy the white people. But anyways, at this point though, my grandpa's teaching me this stuff. So my grandpa's teaching me about non-dualistic software. So I'm thinking like, well, maybe, black people and Mexicans and stuff, they have more dualistic software. They tend to be more, they tend to have more self-confirmatory behavior. And my grandpa would teach me other things. Like he would teach me about, Mozart is, really high level music and really wonderful music. And when I was a communist, leftist, anti-white person, I would be like, well, that's my grandpa just believes that because he's a white supremacist, and Mozart's white, and classical music is white people music, and it's, it helps to keep people ossified and maintain the order. Whereas like I like the jungle music and the ratchety, like the chaos and dissonance. I like that type of stuff because I'm like, yeah, destroy the order. I was a communist, so I was like, yeah, I liked what Hitler called like the Jewish music, or the Jewish and black music. Like I like the sensual stuff, or the stuff that's gonna break people out of the religious. Like Mozart would be religious because it's like nice and serene, right? But I wanted like chaos and dissonance because I wanted to destroy the order. I was a Marxist. So, but now I understand. Like it took me a long time to figure this out, but now I understand what my grandpa's saying. Like Mozart, he helps to the music is peaceful and it helps you to transcend the thoughts, to transcend the ego, the self. It can help to facilitate that. But anyways, but before he taught me that, because you transcend thoughts, and thoughts are shaped by the ego, right? And it took me a long time to realize that I saw myself as Jewish, and that's why I wanted the race mixing, right? So I thought that, no, I'm in transcendental consciousness. I just want everyone to be one and transcend dualistic software. But really, I had an agenda. I had an ego agenda. But my grandpa, he's like, so now I understand like what he's talking about. But, at that time I was like, oh no, you're just a white supremacist. But I'm thinking like, okay, so Mozart's more non-dual consciousness. Okay, well, black people and Mexican people, that's more, they tend to have more dualistic software, and the tattoos and the fighting and the, when I was a communist, I was like, well, yeah, it's because of the white people, it's because of the environments that the white people impose on them, and Pygmalion effect and stuff. But, my grandpa would even say like, well, the Pygmalion effect, stereotype bias is also an aspect of dualistic software. So I started blaming the victim more. And I started becoming more right-wing. I'm like, yeah, well, people of color have more dualistic software. And my grandpa taught, like, if you have dualistic software, then it's harder to transition after life. And you basically kind of go to a hell. And that's the difficulty in transitioning outside the body, because you still believe that you're a separate body. So you have a more difficult time transitioning. So I'm like, yeah, well, black people and brown people probably have a more difficult time. So I started becoming more white supremacist and more pro-white. So my grandpa's kind of been moving me towards this. But now I have a deeper understanding of what he's talking about non-dual software and all that stuff. And the intricacies of it. But at that time, he didn't really teach me what the flow was, and I was confused. And I'll get more to how I started to understand it more in 2020 when I read Dr. Horace's book. But so I was basically just confused, but I was moving more toward the right wing. And like just like a few more examples of me moving more toward the right wing was like, I asked my grandpa, like, Judas, Judas, he basically, or some woman puts perfume on Jesus, right? And then Judas is like, we could have given that perfume to the poor. And when I was a communist, I was like Judas. I'd be like, yeah, give it to the poor, because I wanted race mixing and I wanted to destroy the white people, and I was a Marxist, and I'm like, yeah, give it to the poor, and yeah, that was my ego agenda. But my grandpa would be like, well, giving to the poor doesn't necessarily help the poor; it could just enable them, and it doesn't necessarily help. So, but then Jesus says something like, the poor you will always have among you, but I will not always be among you. My grandpa would be like, yeah, he's talking about the flow. The flow is what's most important, not giving to the poor. My grandpa would be like, that's an immortality project, or that's a formula or a strategy for saving the self. Like, oh, I'll give to the poor so God will reward me. But it's still self-confirmatory and still trying to go to heaven and still doing it or in my case, like I had an ego agenda and wanting to give to the poor, So my grandpa would be like, that's not necessarily the flow, but Jesus represents the flow. And he's saying, the poor will always be among you, but not Jesus, you want to focus on the flow and not, strategies of salvation, like giving to the poor. But when I was a left-wing communist, I was like, oh yeah, of course my grandpa would say that he's a white supremacist, Nazi, and Rand follower, But now I kind of have a deeper understanding of it. But so he's moving me more toward the right wing at this point. And this is like 2020, and I became a right winger. And like, so another example was, I remember I went to a place called Nam Yoga, and it's like a Hindu type of place, Hindu Sikhism. And there was this girl there, and she was like talking about how she was raped, and she was talking about how she liked being raped. Like, she said that she went to this party and she went to the basement to try to make her boyfriend jealous, and then the guy raped her. But she said that after he raped her, she actually kissed him and she liked him. And I was like, and my grandpa would always talk about like, yeah, there is no innocent victims, and it's your software that gets you in trouble, right? But my grandpa would be like, it's not you, it's your software. So I'm not blaming you. I'm not blaming the person. I'm blaming the software. But you could always upgrade the software. You are not your software, right? But so I always saw that as victim blaming, though. Still, I was always like, yeah, he's just a victim blamer. But now at this point, I remember I was talking to my grandpa, and I wrote about this in that existential metapsychiatry book I wrote at that time, which was very right-wing oriented and right-wing leaning. I was talking like, I was saying to my grandpa, like, yeah, this girl, she was expressing, she wanted to be superior to her boyfriend and make him feel bad. So she was expressing superior, inferior software. Like, another example of, just so you get an idea of that, is like, I remember I went to this Jewish, Messianic church thing, and there was this guy there, and he was like talking like, I've never had sex. And he was like 60 years old. He was a Jewish guy. He's like, I've never had sex before. And I asked but he had like a sense of superiority. I asked my grandpa, what software is he expressing? My grandpa's like, superior, inferior software. He thinks he's superior by being inferior. He thinks he's superior by not having sex. And he's bragging about it. So he's still focused on himself. He's not really in the flow. So I was like, okay, I kind of understand that. And, but so like the other example would be like in this case where this girl got raped, like I was like, yeah, she's expressing superior, inferior software, and she wants to be superior to her boyfriend by making him jealous, and it got her in trouble, and she ended up getting raped. So she's not an innocent victim. Like my grandpa talked about, there's no innocent victims. It's your software, right? And so I started moving more right wing, becoming a victim blamer. My grandpa would be like, I'm not a victim blamer. I don't blame the victim because there is no person, there is no self, there is no separate self. I just blame the software, but you can upgrade the software, But so I became like a victim blamer. I'm like, yeah, it was her software. This girl, she was raped, and in a sense, she, I became like those anti-Me Too people, like a right winger anti-Me Too person. Like, she kind of wanted it, and she put herself in that position, and even she liked it. And my grandpa would be like, yeah, some people like, to express predator prey software, and they like to have their world views confirmed that they are a separate self. Or the world views confirmed that this world is ally enemy or predator prey and stuff like that. So she enjoys being humiliated, and because then she can say, see, guys are evil, and she can have her worldview confirmed, the illusion or the matrix or the virtual reality confirmed, right? So I started becoming more right wing oriented. So I'm like, yeah, people kind of ask for what they get, and my grandpa even talked about like past lives. My grandpa kind of he didn't believe anything, but he would talk about like, but it's possible there's past lives, and that's why some people have head starts and some people don't. But I always saw that as like justifying the status quo, and that's why I hated religion. I hated Hinduism. I hated Buddhism. I hated every religion because I was like, it's all white supremacists. It's just maintaining the status quo, conservative. And I was a Marxist communist, and I wanted to destroy it all. And I also saw division as dividing people, and I wanted to mix the white people and destroy the white people. So, but anyways, that's basically what was going on. So I was becoming more right wing, and so my grandpa was like, "Yeah, that's good, Brian. Yeah, you're understanding. It's a software issue." So I'm becoming more right wing oriented. But it was ironic because that's what my grandpa and my family was doing to me. They're like, "Oh, it was your software, oh, Ryan. It wasn't a shoot away machine. It was just," but it was a shoot away machine. If it wasn't for the shoot away machine, that wouldn't have happened. But maybe I had in my past life, I did do some stuff, and I know that I did have express predator prey software toward white people. Maybe that was the punishment. That's why the shoot away machine stuff happened. Maybe I wasn't in the flow, right? But regardless, my grandpa was moving me more toward right wing victim blaming. But he would say, "I'm not victim blaming. There is no victim. There is no self. I'm talking about the software." But okay, whatever. So I was moving more right wing, and like I said, when I was a communist, I wanted to be like, "Hey, Grandpa, wasn't Jesus a communist? Wasn't he like a hippie? Like he didn't work, like because I wanted to destroy white people. I wanted to destroy society, and I wanted, yeah, he didn't work, and he was like, just a hippie pretty much, and he but when I became a right winger, I was looking at the opposite. So, but my grandpa was like, "No, well, Jesus had people take care of him because, he was in the flow." And, and I was like, well, because I wanted people to help me with the quadrant model. My grandpa's like, well, my grandpa's looking down on me because he didn't believe the quadrant model. So yeah, so basically I was just moving more toward the right wing. I was going to say some other stuff, but I can't remember what I was going to say. But, yeah, so I guess I'll continue in the next lecture. But yeah, my point is I was moving more toward right wing, and I feel like my grandpa was moving me more toward right wing orientation. But then, like I said, he started to confuse me, and in 2020 I became a left winger again, and I'll get to that.